Well, hello everyone. It's great to have Sport Unlocked in collaboration with leaders and to be back here for a second year to chew the fat over several sports news stories. Unlike last year, we don't seem to have a live takeover developing as we're sitting up on stage. Newcastle United unfolding when we were here last year. It's got a bit quiet there, hasn't it, since then? So alongside me, Rob Harris from Sky News, Tariq Panja from the New York Times, Martyn Ziegler from the Times. What a year it's been.
Yeah, it's. I think Tariq, you weren't here last year, were you?
I wasn't.
We had Nic Coward as our guest, and I sort of put him through the ringer a bit unfairly. So he's going to be coming on later, and so I'm going to make a humble public apology to having him.
The scene for apologies. Tariq, any apologies you want to make while you've got the audience?
Well, I think there's way too many people I need to apologise to at the moment, so a broad apology to everyone who's been offended in the last few weeks.
A catch-all. Well,
catch-all apology.
Good to be back alongside you as well.
Yeah,
a few quieter weeks.
Good to have you. Good to have you back, Rob.
And wherever you've been to Turkey recently. You're at the European Club Association meeting. How was that?
Yeah, the European Club Association meeting in Istanbul, bringing the great and the good of the club game. I must say, from a newsline perspective, bit dull if I'm honest, but behind the scenes, the usual shenanigans, clubs looking at what's happening in this post-Super League environment, and it was all about divvying up the money. There's a record amount of money now available from 2024, and right now we're at this point where there is that wrestling over who gets what. Is it the big clubs who are going to get most of this 2 billion euros, or, having seen Super League collapse, can they bring their kind of strength in numbers to bear and get some of that? Martyn, what do you think? How do you think that's going to
go? I think there's going to probably be a situation where nobody is happy, because that's how it normally works out. And
so rare to get everyone in agreement. And you spent last week at the Premier League meeting.
I was,
to give a flavour, that's just hanging around the hotel, hoping people stop and talk.
That's what basically spending a day in the lobby of a five-star hotel in London, being ignored by football executives as they leave the meeting. But it's worth going, because you do pick up some stuff, and I think some stuff around money and how this deal to provide extra cash to the EFL, that's still being debated, and the issues around whether there's actually going to be a statutory independent regulator, and then a couple of other things on the side about this this struggle to get this deal for NFTs, this non-fungible tokens across the world.
Explain them to us.
Oh, we can get into it. Want to get into it later. Well, I actually spent last week at the far more celebratory part of sport, watching Roger Federer in his final match in his entire career. So,
well, in your new career, Robbie, so you get all these great gigs, you see.
Some things can be uplifting, although the big event we've got coming up, which we're going to focus on first, the Qatar World Cup, and all the many issues surrounding that, and a journey we've all been on since being in Zurich 12 years ago in the snow of that FIFA vote that we've never talked about since, completely clean. And we saw last week with the FA announcement on their plans, how they mount activism around the tournament, and just today, as we're preparing to go on stage, an announcement from Hummel, the kit maker of Denmark, about how they're going to navigate the thorny area of being a team sponsor and also being wary of Qatar as well.
Yeah, so I mean, Denmark, they've been one of the teams that have been most sort of active in human rights messages, and Hummel Sport have just put out a statement saying that they've produced a World Cup shirt for Denmark without their visible logo and their visible chevrons designs. And they say this is because they don't want to be seen to endorsing a World Cup which has cost thousands of people their lives. Now, I mean, Qatar disputes the fact that it's thousands. They say it's only, I think, 3 deaths they say are related to World Cup projects, but investigations have shown that they're quite a few, 2,800, I think Nic Coward reported at the weekend in the Mail on Sunday, 2,800 unexplained deaths of workers. And this sort of tactic by Hummel Sport, I mean, you could claim it's a strong marketing tool as well as a sort of human rights message. But it's an interesting one for brands and sponsors going into it.
It is, but I think the fact that we're, 12 years into this, 60 days from the World Cup, and we still don't know how many people have died, is just feels wrong, this issue. Because if, there's a Guardian number from Pete Pattinson at 6,500, the Qatari number is 3, and that's in relation to people who've died building World Cup stadiums. That's all they're counting. But this really is a country that has been reconfigured and rebuilt in almost its entirety for this football tournament, and all these people have gone there to work and build it. So there is this, and the other reason why we've got this conjecture is there aren't autopsies. So these are people dying, typically age 30, between 30 and 40. Typically in this room, chances are between 30 and 40, you're not going to die. Those numbers are enormous. So I think we should get some clarity as to what we're talking about here. And it feels a bit wrong. It feels a bit unfair on the people who've built this, that we can't tell that story in a way that's correct. And in terms of what Hummel are doing, I think there is a pattern, particularly in Northern European countries, Holland and Belgium, for example. They've had sponsors who aren't. ING Group, the banking group, sponsor the Netherlands. They're not activating during the World Cup. They're not sending any clients to the tournament. GLS, a delivery company, sponsors Belgium, also not doing the same. But on the other hand, you get people who are making a great deal amount of money. Not least David Beckham, north of 100 million to sponsor the country. So, horses for courses, Rob.
And he can't even do much in terms of how he carries out that role, because he keeps himself away from any potential questions around Qatari matters. So quite a challenging area for sponsors to deal with, and who better to bring up on stage our first guest, Amal Singh, who's worked with so many sponsors, particularly Budweiser. Welcome up on stage, great to see you, and hand you that. So just explain, who do you work for now, who have you worked for? Give you a brief CV.
Oh, you don't want the full CV, then we'll be here all afternoon. But no, I work for MKTG. We're part of Dentsu. We're a marketing agency that delivers partnerships for a range of global brands and rights holders. And with regards to what we're doing at the moment, our position on the World Cup is that the normal playbook doesn't apply. You've got a lot of brands, you've got a lot of partners out there, and a lot of brands who aren't partners but want to join this celebration of football that's happening at this unusual time of the year, who need to be prepared, because there's so many variables at play, there's so many sands that are shifting around, and people need to be ready. So we're helping a lot of our brands, a lot of our clients get ready for the World Cup, because it could be a powder keg of very socially charged issues, which you guys just alluded to.
And how do you navigate that with them? They've paid all this money to be, say, FIFA sponsors, team sponsors. They want to get some return on that, but at the same time, the concern is some of their social posts will end up with a backlash from the public as well. Some people talking about the deaths. How do they navigate that during the tournament?
Yeah, it's about being prepared, really, and it's about making sure that you're not just prepared to say the right things, but you're prepared to do the right things. And that's why we're seeing actions like what Hummels are doing at the moment, are doing at the moment, and what we've seen with the FA and this One Love campaign. There's a balance being struck at the moment with organisations who are engaging with the World Cup in order to make a statement and almost placate a lot of the public anger that is out there and a lot of the genuine concerns around issues such as human rights and LGBTQ+ rights. But at the same time, the World Cup is the World Cup. It's an incredibly powerful thing, and we've seen many times in tournaments in the past when the football starts, sometimes these issues and talking points melt away, right? And I think a lot of people at FIFA will be hoping that happens. But there's a lot of evidence to show that the world has changed over the last 4 years. We've done a lot of talking to fans, surveying fans. The pandemic reinvigorated conversations around things such as the environment, sustainability, and also racial equality, leading to a lot of actions being taken by a lot of footballers and protagonists that are involved in the game, means that, and also the audience themselves being a lot more socially conscious and vocal on Twitter, means that there's every chance that we're going to see this issue come up. And we saw it at Euro 2020, didn't we? We saw it with LGBTQ that came up, and a lot of brands were playing catch up at that point because it flared up as an issue with Hungary. And people were, okay, what should we do? How can we enter this conversation? So it's about being prepared.
Is it kind of easier, though, for Qatar's tiny, in terms of it's not a brand going to next World Cups in United States, Mexico and Canada, the biggest marketplace in the world. Is it easier to say, you know what, we don't like the smell of Qatar, we're not going to do it, compared to, say, a huge marketplace? Because Qatar, for all its wealth, it's not going to be the biggest market for these companies. So is it easier to be seen to do the right thing there?
Well, I think Qatar is obviously a nation in a region of the world that punches above its weight, as we've seen in sport. So, these nations are here now, and they're very interesting challenges around areas such as human rights is something that's on the sporting calendar, and is something that you guys discuss week in, week out, because sport is clearly something that they've identified as being a place where they can, accelerate their agenda and accelerate their growth and influence on sport and geopolitics, if you like. So I think it doesn't make a difference, in my view, Tariq, because Qatar is going to be the centre of the universe. This November and December, it will be all eyes on Qatar. So I think anyone that's looking to engage in football, for the official sponsors.
I mean, from a if I'm selling, I don't know, a popular soft drink to 300 million people, I might think, do I want to upset this marketplace? Or if I'm selling the same popular sports drink to 100,000 Qataris, it might be a different value judge. That's what. Wondering.
I think with the World Cup, though, it's all about the TV audience, isn't it? So wherever the World Cup is, the local. The benefits on the ground for sponsors is minuscule compared to what that TV audience gives you. So again, I think it makes little difference.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, obviously you work internationally. Is it very much a sort of Western focus, the sort of human rights issues in Qatar? I mean, are people in Japan, for example, or Korea, are they sort of bothered about it?
I think it's global, actually. We ran a study called Decoding at the start of the year, which was the first post-pandemic study of fans of sport, where we spoke to 6,000 fans all over the globe, and we found that people are a lot more socially conscious. We found that the last 4 years, the pandemic has affected the whole globe and changed our habits and changed our views on things, and the fallout on issues such as what happened with George Floyd and all the protests after that, and a lot of reinvigorated conversations around the environment has led to a very socially conscious world. And it does vary in different places, and we've seen, for example, Northern Europe is probably the socially conscious hub of fandom, and that's why you're seeing nations like in the past Norway and the Netherlands and Denmark be a lot more vocal on issues such as human rights. But we've seen it in England, in the UK, and certainly in the US. It's a very socially conscious audience now, and there are differences, but that does exist in Asia too, and Africa and places like that too.
We focused on the brands and how delicately they might have to navigate Qatar. Mm-hmm. What about the athletes, the players themselves? Mm-hmm. Is there a gain to actually be seen as socially conscious and aware, particularly with so many fans looking on, always perhaps expecting them to sort of show an awareness of the issues?
Yeah, we're seeing a growing generation now, aren't we? This emerging generation of footballers and athletes who utilise their platform and see that as an opportunity to stand for issues that go beyond what they do on the pitch. And I think that's been a really powerful thing over the last few years, and consequently their fans now demand that of them as well. If you look at other sports, if you look at Formula One, for example, Lewis Hamilton, he's not been shy to say, this is what I stand for, I'm going to use my platform to speak up about things. And he can't control the fact that F1 have a Grand Prix in certain nations, but he will make his statements, and he'll speak up for what he believes in. And I fully expect that we will see some of that at the World Cup. I would not be surprised. And I think racism is another issue where a lot of footballers have made it very clear through taking a knee and through other work that they're doing that they're going to stand up for it and make a statement. And if it does flare up, which I wouldn't bet against, I expect that footballers will be leading the vocal, expressions against it.
And we are dealing with a credit crunch, a global financial crisis at the moment, again, almost sort of reviving the days of 2008, and a cost of living crisis all round. How do you think that's going to impact the sponsors going into this tournament, knowing that so many of their potential consumers are struggling at the moment around the world?
Yeah, I think for brands, and this is something we talk to brands about, unrelated to sport and the World Cup as well, is you have to be conscious of what's happening economically at the moment. You're in a commerce style relationship, with consumers. You need to understand how the sands are shifting and how, how things will be perceived. So, we've seen that purpose-driven marketing and campaigns have grown exponentially over the last few years, and I think that will be huge over the next, 6 months to a year, particularly around, domestically. You're looking at things such as food banks and, areas like that, and how brands can give back to help people, because we are going to see, unfortunately, a lot of people struggle in society because of these issues. If you look at this World Cup, I think this is a World Cup where, unfortunately, a lot of people have been priced out of going out there. So, and the fact that it's winter, I think it shifts. There are opportunities and there are setbacks. It's going to be a lot more about the home viewing occasion. What are the opportunities around that? It's going to be more of a solo viewing occasion. If you think about World Cups, usually it's gathering with your mates outside, going to pubs with big outdoor screens, watching on a big screen. Ultimately, there'll be less of that because it's in November and December, speaking from a UK perspective. So what is that? How can you add to that that viewing experience at home? Because 99.9% of people who are experiencing this World Cup are going to be experiencing it at home.
Well, it's been great to have you on stage. It's unpredictable, all this. Just checking with the others. No more questions?
No, we'll talk about beer and World Cup another time, no doubt.
As the former bud man. Yeah. I was to ask you if you actually enjoy drinking it.
We'll have a beer. We'll talk about it, yeah.
Who knows, that'll be bud. Thanks for joining us up on stage.
Thank you.
While we're talking about Qatar,
Thanks a lot.
Nic, we'll be nicer to you this time. Nic Coward, there's no ambush here this time.
Nic Coward, welcome up on stage. Formerly Premier League, involved in Kabaddi, Golf England, so many things.
Nic,
returning guest.
welcome. I asked Nic earlier about the Nic's with Kabaddi now in India, booming product, about what the rules on oiling players are.
Please don't.
I'm not going to ask you now. But I did. We're talking about Qatar and the World Cup, and like I said, we're 50, 60 days there. And as Rob said, this journey we've been on journalistically as well. And I was thinking about one of these stories, which was moving the tournament from the summer to winter, and the tension it created with the European leagues and the clubs. November and December, prime viewing time. You were at the Premier League, I believe, during this period. How big a deal is something like that, this calendar change?
Thanks, Tariq, and thank you very much for the even shorter notice this year than Martyn gave me last year to speak. Thank you very much.
I did have about 2 minutes.
You
So
had 2 minutes.
the record has been set.
Start with. It's an extraordinary moment in European club football, and as a fan now, looking in lots of other sporting involvements. That's the first thing to reflect on. It is a momentous moment. The change in the rhythm that we've all become used to in our fandom, and all that means, whether that be the fan, me as a fan, all the way through to the club, the leagues, everything, the entire system. So let's go back, and with the 5 minutes I've had to recall how it was at that time, and you were going through more of the process by which the World Cup was allocated. The World Cups were granted the right to host, the honour to host. I suppose the first reaction of people involved in football was when it started to emerge that actually this might mean what you're describing, a change in the calendar, was Well, everything from astonishment, frustration, through to, I suppose, downright anger amongst some. I'm not talking about necessarily English football. I'm talking about across the whole of Europe.
Javier Tebas isn't here today.
Javier, I can exclusively. I don't think it'd be surprised to anyone to know that the table thumping was mostly led by Javier Tebas, a great guy who doesn't shy away from expressing views on big issues. And that's a really interesting point. I suppose that's a compare and contrast to what I recall as being the Premier League viewpoint, which, and you'll know this, and you've heard this many times, that view of what the Premier League is and the role of the organisation with the clubs as good football citizens. You know, you could get angry, was a view. You could start to say, well, this is a reason to try to, this is unfair, go back, reallocate, all that stuff. I don't think that's true, and I'm looking at Nick, and I've got Alberto here as well, who were also involved at the time. Our view was very much, okay...
Alberto from the European leagues, and
Nick Noble, who was a colleague at the Premier League at the time. And so we were living...
For those who can't see in the room.
Fair enough. We were living through this, but it's our starting point was, this is going to happen. We've got to make this work in the least interrupted, least disruptive, least bad way for our clubs and all, you know, fans, players, everyone involved in our part of the world. And the process by which we then had to go through that, I think it was one of the first occasions on pretty much there was a gathering of people, including leagues. So I remember Richard Scudamore himself, you know, he was brought onto a group with other league heads, others from European professional football, together with colleagues across all the regions of the world. A unique process, really, to work through. What are the options? And ultimately come down to what's the least disruptive. Because again, you have to look at it and reflect on the fact that Europe works to one calendar, other systems work to other calendars. And so that was our general approach, and I remember it being an exhaustive, won't surprise you to know, Premier League world data-driven, a lot of analysis, a lot of view, a lot of consultation, engagement with clubs to try to work out what our view was, a lot of collaboration with the other leagues. I remember Christian Seifert was the leader at the Bundesliga at the time. You mentioned Javier. We had Lars Christa, who was heavily involved in the European leagues, and we came to our view, a European view, and ultimately a global view. And I think what is actually remarkable now, maybe just to conclude, is this momentous change. It seemed, you know, huge change for a lot of people, but here we are. It's happening. It's going ahead. The system has worked to accommodate this vast change, and we're all now looking forward, I'm sure, to there it is. There's the World Cup.
Yeah.
We'll all have to accept that, you know, maybe we won't be looking at for Shrewsbury Town results when we thought we might too.
No, but just to put a final point on it, the leagues, I think, wanted January and February. Sepp Blatter wanted November and December, and essentially has got his way there.
Yeah, Tariq, let's not get into what is true negotiation and what you really think is the right outcome and what you think is the most achievable and all those kinds of things. Of course, there were negotiating positions taken. I think it's reasonable to say that the outcome was one which the Premier League at the time thought, yeah, okay, we get that, that works, that will work for us, we will make that work.
I think I was going to say it's slightly ironic then, you know, after this long battle, and we've got it down to 28 days, and then a couple of months before the World Cup, FIFA just get another day, add another day in, just like that.
But then bring it back, and that is, away from the actual question, that was all about, government's decision-making process, and that's, if you reflect on it, I've been involved in a lot of sports and a lot of processes. That's the bit which I think ultimately doesn't stand up. How could that be? How can that happen? How can you go into a process where nobody knows that this is going to be one of the potential outcomes? And that, I guess, again, it's a reflection on perhaps that decision-making process that doesn't get talked about so much now.
And so ultimately, the reason why we got the date switch was because the clubs had to agree, and they struck the deal with FIFA at the time to increase the finances that actually clubs would get redistributed. And from the FIFA prize winning shortly, we actually should have the European Club Association. Charlie Marshall is back in the room. We're going to bring up very shortly so he can prepare for that. But finally, while we've got you on, of course, one of the other big matters in English football is the matter of a regulator. Will the Liz Truss government drop the regulator plan or not? Was she the regulator? Is it a job you would want?
Well, I suppose it's a job in many ways I've had and done, not just in football, but in racing and others. And I suppose that's at the heart of the debate. I think we touched on it last year. There's so much in the Tracy Crouch report which is good and obvious and makes sense, and whatever process is carried out by whom, sensible stuff to be done. The issues which are always going to cause issues, headaches for a lot of people, particularly those people who are going to have to try to write what legislation might look like, is stuff like intervention in distribution, markets, commercial rights, and so on. So I still think that there will be a sensible outcome, because all these things are good things. Everyone wants good regulation. Again, back to the Premier League, back to English football. Having a conversation today about one of the great strengths of English football is actually the true sense that it is, in many ways, and this might surprise others, but you'll know from your wanderings around the world, very well regulated. People generally respect the decisions and the people who are engaged in the process. What we were talking about this time last year, good people, good process, coming up, often in difficult circumstances, making clear and reasoned decisions. And I think that's a hallmark of the system. My own view is it doesn't much matter how you badge up those decision makers, as long as you've got good people, and that will generally involve a degree of independence. It doesn't matter whether you call them a statutory or an FA or a Premier League, or in other sports, the federation, the league, or some other body. Everyone has their own system, but I think the real key is have a system, good people in it, a clear system. Everyone has confidence, at least in the process, that they can see and then have the maximum chance of faith in the outcome, wherever that decision is made. And it tends to, I think that's ultimately where this will come to. And as I say, however it's badged up, that's what the outcome will be. And it's largely the same as the outcome or the processes that we have now.
How to make this exciting for a Fly in the World documentary, which could be coming for the Premier League. We'll discuss in a moment. But Nic, thank you for joining us again on stage at Air Leaders.
Great pleasure. Thanks
a lot.
Thanks, Nic.
So we touched on it there. It was your story, Martyn. Are we going to get a Drive to Survive style Premier League series?
Yeah, or Dive to Survive. That was my working title.
There you go, mate. Well, you earned the big bucks.
Yeah, I mean, so the clubs had a meeting last week, and this was Netflix had proposed a series made by Box to Box, the makers of Drive to Survive. They didn't sort of come up with a great deal of detail, but the clubs are interested, and they asked the executive to go away and come back with more details, a formal proposal, what it would look like, how much behind the scenes access they would need to give, what it would mean in terms of highlights, how it would work internationally, because I think that would be the main benefit for the Premier League, is having a sort of completely global programme which can drive interest overseas markets particularly.
Although it's not necessarily, you do get a big check, but it's not that, is it? It's this this engagement and creating this new fact, because it's been a phenomenon for Formula One. The through that programme, I suppose myself in some way, I fell out of any kind of interest in Formula One, watched a bit of that documentary, and then you get the personalities, and you're suddenly...
You need to go to the paddock.
I'm not invited to the paddock club, unfortunately. I haven't got. But
whining and dining around the race.
What was interesting about that show was it created these kind of new characters and storylines in somewhere like, I don't know, the guy in 11th and 15th, and you're suddenly rooting for... I'd never heard of this guy Pierre Gasly before, but I have now. How's this dude? And it created this enormous new fan base that is looking for something else as well, rather than just who's going to beat who on the field when it comes to football, or who's going to do what in the place in the Formula One race. So that's set a template. You can see why the Premier League will be interested in that.
I mean, does it happen a bit like we've seen with some of the reality TV contests, that one format's great, then others start to replicate it, then you get saturation? For a period, we didn't seem to have many sports documentaries. Now there's a whole raft of them, and they all end just trying to emulate the existing product rather than innovating, really.
And how would it look for a Premier League? It's very different, Premier League to Formula One, as Rob said. You've got all those shows as well on Amazon with each of these teams, the Arsenal one at the moment. Have you got any idea what it would look like?
Not particularly, but I mean, just to go back to the Drive to Survive thing, so Silverstone opened their tickets for the British Grand Prix about 10 days ago, but the system collapsed.
Wow.
Because the demand, and they ended up selling more tickets in a day than they had done than they did in something like 32 weeks a year ago.
It's all the Pierre Gasly fans.
And they said, this Drive to Survive thing has just taken off so much. It's suddenly become a huge demand. So I don't think in the UK it would be a sort of, we've watched whatever the Nottingham Forest sort of inside story of how they scraped the survival or whatever. But I think the idea perhaps would be internationally where you do get sort of personality-driven stuff behind the scenes together, perhaps with highlights that you might not get elsewhere, and as like a highlights package, perhaps. That's just my.
This is what Nick Noble's missed out on. You could have had a film crew with him in the Premier League office.
Of the comms department, one thing will come up, as we see very often in the Premier League, is how you weigh the voices of the 20, how you spread the exposure of the teams throughout the league. In the UK, there are certain caps on the number of times a team can be played. At a minimum, you need to ensure they do get that exposure, a minimum of 10 times a season. There will be a focus on actually who gets disproportionate attention, who's squeezed out, and they won't be happy the team's squeezed out of the series.
No, it's kind of, but it's all in the round, I suppose. You can imagine something like, clearly, transfer deadline day or something. If you get these cameras in there, you can imagine the kind of drama that would create, whether it's Nottingham Forest or Man United or whatever. The tension in the room. We don't see that, do we, at the moment?
No.
Well, someone who knows all about the tension behind the scenes of clubs is Charlie Marshall from the European Club Association. He was starting to rest at the back of the room, but he's now ready to make his way to the front here.
Great link. Great link.
Charlie is the managing director of the ECA. He's involved in so many of those big talks. Great to have you up here. As I believe one of our long-time listeners.
Absolutely. Like everybody else in this room.
So you've come fresh from the...
I just want to ask you, did I describe that meeting as too boring? When he asked me, you were there, it was your meeting. Well, it wasn't that newsy, was it? The last ECA.
Now he's going to.
How was it? Was it newsy? Was it
the
big?
One
the one we just came back from.
I think you were more impressed with the surroundings than the meeting, weren't you?
Very opulent.
Now we can say, since we've got you here, so who was battling, who actually was rowing behind the scenes? I know you want to tell everyone, that's why you've come here.
It was a very peaceful meeting,
Unfortunately.
as you saw. Unfortunately for you, things are quite peaceful these days.
And for those who don't know, you've been there behind the scenes as UEFA and the clubs have been navigating all the changes to the Champions League in recent years, the potential 24 locked-in teams, that plan was scrapped. Then we had the completely separate Super League plan that was quashed, and the ECA emerges with new leadership and Nasser Al-Khalifa, and then UEFA and yourselves agree on the Swiss model with the increased group stage from 2024. So it might seem quite mundane to some, but actually very consequential, isn't it? The whole football landscape changes from 24 through a lot of the work you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, I joined about 4 years ago, sort of late 2018, and I think that was at the start of what became known, and I guess still is known, as the sort of post-2024 series of projects or series of components that fit together to form the overall relationship between the clubs at a European and international level, and both UEFA and FIFA. And I know there are plenty of other stakeholders involved, and there are plenty of other stakeholders in this room and listening, but from my perspective and from ECA's perspective, one of the most important things since 2018, since I've joined, was to secure those post-2024 sort of framework agreements such that we could reach a level of stability in the system, which clearly wasn't there in 2018, and clearly got a lot worse between 2018 and now. Interestingly, kind of spurred by COVID, and I will always argue that the fact that no one had a physical meeting for about 14 or 15 months in the world of sports politics is a really bad thing, because a lot of things need to be sorted out, not on the end of a video screen.
Yeah.
So the combination of what COVID was doing, to the sort of overall financial picture, plus the fact that no one was speaking properly.
And also it meant they didn't encounter us in hotel lobbies, so that was pretty dull.
And
you
that
know,
just
we couldn't join the waiting room on Zoom, so it's less exciting that way.
That definitely made things less exciting.
And what about distributing money, particularly to the women's game? We've had an expansion in the Women's Champions League, but a lot of the leagues aren't professional. England is one of the few, which means actually it's on the European level where teams will grow, expand and get those competitive games. How are you looking at actually expanding the women's competition, which is only one European competition at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, there was a small but significant device introduced into the 21-24 men's distribution arrangement, which was an investment into the women's competition. So 10 million euros goes every year from the men's game into the women's prize pot. But and that is small but significant.
Because the team winning the Champions League in the men's one will get 140 million.
Exactly. So I won't claim that is a sort of major financial investment in terms of quantum, but the significance is its presence, is actually the introduction of the thing in the first place and where it might lead to. But money and prize money is one thing. You're absolutely right. I think that the whole competition design, which at the moment we're in a 21 to 25 cycle for the Women's Champions League, after 25, that needs to be looked at now and reflected on. How's it going in the Women's Champions League? What are we seeing in terms of competitive balance? In terms of access,
some of this not down to you though, Charlie? I mean, isn't this down to the broadcasters and sponsors putting their own money on the table too? Otherwise, it's just moving money from one place to the other. This should be, as we saw with the Euros, it's a growth opportunity, isn't it? Do you anticipate a lot more money organically coming into the women's game from broadcasters and sponsors, rather than let's move this pot to there and that will fund it? What you see?
I think it's a combination, right? We're still in a world where commercially, the more we can sort of seed the women's game, the better, right? So just like I think with any investment, the more that you can actually find to sort of put into it with the expectation that will pay back in years to come, because it's not going to pay back on an annual basis, the better, right? So that investment that the men's game can make in the women's game from, let's say, prize money is really good, because it's not, it doesn't put the pressure on having to get all the money for the women's game from annual revenue from broadcasters or sponsors. Having said that, the signs are good. The signs are good. I don't think we're seeing a dramatic step change that we would really like to. The women's game has gone up by 500% commercially, but it's all trending in the right direction. It's still a slow burn. We need the continuing professionalisation of the game. We need the media to get behind it, and the media does like to get behind it, which is great. We need the stars, right? We need the star players, because that's what drives any sport.
Sure.
And it needs the clubs to invest in the staff, which doesn't actually always happen on the women's side. You find the sort of fewer resources are diverted, so they do struggle in terms of actually maximising exposure when they're not actually.
That's true. That is changing as well. And I won't name any names, but even in my time here, there are certain clubs who 4 years ago were still saying we're not going to invest in the women's game. We will not have a women's team.
Really?
4 years ago.
Because it's a cost.
Because it's a cost, and because the
Well, it's not that long ago. It's not that long ago. It was Manchester United.
Manchester United didn't have a team.
So,
When Alex Ferguson apparently wanted things focused more on the first team and the men's side.
That's right, apparently. The final question from me just want to go back to this thing about the finance, the split. Do you think it's possible that the coefficient element of the funding will be scrapped? So where you get a chunk of the market pool depending on your historical performances in Europe?
I think it's too early to say.
Yeah.
I think all of those pillars, which is what we sort of call them, in terms of how, when you get down to the money that's left for each competition, within the competition, how does it get split between starting fees, performance fees, the coefficient and the market pool. I think all of that will be looked at, but it's too early to say that.
Okay, and from me, a last one for you, Charlie, and it's this sort of event where you get ideas, etc.
He's had an idea.
This is, couldn't we try and guess some of yours, but let's see.
You and I were sat next to each other again in Luxembourg at the European Court of Justice. The UEFA is being sued by A20.
To make clear, you won't both in court together. This was independent observers.
We will. A22, which is one of the companies behind the Super League, and the Super League company are suing UEFA essentially for its monopolistic practices. Now, if UEFA was to lose this case, is there not a... Why should UEFA run all the club competitions? Can't it just regulate them? We've been talking about this, about splitting the roles, etc. This event organising function, can't someone else organise European football and UEFA act as a regulator, or is that, that's not sexy enough for the people in Neon, because it is great to run these things? Can it happen?
I mean, it's either a very complicated one or a very easy one to answer, so I'll take the easy way. From a club perspective, from an ECA perspective, we've always stood for governance reform, but from within the system. Right, so taking into account the current stakeholder landscape, what all the stakeholders do, and how they got there is kind of, one side of the story. But the fact that we are where we are is the kind of reality that we need to look at. But for the last 14 years of ECA's history, we've been there to sort of drive more partnership, more engagement, more involvement, more representation for the clubs in all of these European footballing matters, including the competitions. And one of the things that's obviously been written about a little bit and talked about a little bit is this joint venture that we have with UEFA. And it's been in place for 6 or so years, and it's continually evolving. That is focused on the commercial aspects of the competitions. So in that joint venture, I think what we're saying is UEFA and the clubs have an equal role coming together to commercialise the competitions. And that bit of, it's not the whole story, but that bit of the governance of European competitions, I would argue, is showing signs of being reformed, and that's something that we've sort of stood for. And I would say that the European football system as it currently is, we should all be quite proud of that, and we should all be saying to the regulators, look, here's a good example of remedies that come from within the system, rather than sort of be at risk from remedies that come from outside the system.
The European Cup, a concept that emerged from French journalists, are perhaps who better to run or conceive ideas for European competitions than journalists. But as we just look down the line, 20 years' time, crystal ball, Champions League, will it still exist? Will it have teams from outside of Europe in it? Will it still be largely midweek? So I'll start with the first. Will it exist still, the Champions League, or will it be
20 years' time?
Yeah.
I think there will always be a competition that sort of somehow sits at the top of the pyramid, right?
Domestic leagues might say they're the top of the pyramid.
It's difficult to I don't want to be higher up about it, but ultimately it sort of does feed into one thing, doesn't it? I mean, at the moment on a continental basis. So whatever it's called, and
we might not have a pyramid in 20 years either, right? If the Super League had happened.
There still will be a competition to crown.
Yeah.
I think that's UEFA's word, isn't it? To crown the top club. And so whatever that competition is called, or wherever it sits, I think it will still exist.
Just with European teams, or do you think there'll be more global elements?
I think there'll always be one with European teams.
We've got you on tape saying that. See what happens when we're back here in 20 years' time.
My goodness me, I think we're all doing pretty well if we're back here in 20 years' time.
Charlie, thanks for joining us. Charlie Marshall, Managing Director of the European Club Association. Great to join us.
Thank you.
Thinking maybe we should see if there's any questions on the floor before maybe we get onto boxing, the future of boxing at the Olympics.
The future of the pound, the future of the pound as well.
And the pound. Has anyone got any questions from the floor to put us on the spot? I can see some people from the world of football, but they're all resistant for now. Boxing, its future is further in doubt at the Olympics, isn't it? There's been elections with the body that previously ran the sport at Olympics, but no longer can in the IOC run it. Fill us in, what's been happening?
Well, when did they say elections? There was supposed to be an election on Sunday. and the Russian President Umar Kremlev actually was re-elected without there being an election, because his Dutch opponent was sort of declared ineligible by a vote of the members. The IEBA, as it's now called, is sponsored and basically funded by Gazprom, the Russian state-owned energy company. Umar Kremlev was pictured with Vladimir Putin 2 weeks ago. And they've sort of gone to war with the IOC now, because the IOC are sort of raising questions about whether they should organise the boxing qualifiers for Paris. And I think we're now getting to this stage where there's questions about whether actually in the longer term whether boxing is going to be part of the Olympics, or whether there will be a completely new IOC-run organisation.
Well, it was the IOC that, because of all of this, dates back years, this stuff, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It was the IOC that organised the competition for Tokyo as well, if I remember correctly. I think having a Russian guy sponsored by Gazprom, pictured with Putin, probably isn't likely to get you back into international sport anytime quick at the moment, right?
Well, as we close up as well, we think what has changed since last year when we were on the stage here at Leaders. We've had a full-on invasion of Ukraine by the Russians. We've had Russia kicked out by FIFA and UEFA from playing their teams, but we've still got Russian officials involved in FIFA and UEFA. They aren't suspended. We've got a decision to come from the IOC in terms of the Paris 24 games. UEFA have said that Russia won't be part of Euro 2024 qualifying, but what a year it's been geopolitically, how it's collided with sport, and also where we go next in terms of particularly FIFA, where we've seen the close association with Gianni Infantino and Vladimir Putin, which has put them in a difficult place, and difficult decisions to come as this war continues.
Yeah, I mean, it just shows that this, when you get a country like Russia, which is sort of determined to get a national pride from a sort of dictator, basically, by bringing top sporting events, and we just, we saw the IOC and FIFA bowing and scraping before him for the Sochi Olympics and the World Cup, and it just, I think it's just a warning. Sports governing bodies should not ally themselves with regimes. And we're seeing it again with FIFA and Qatar, Saudi Arabia.
And this is the very week. Any congratulations in terms of...
Congratulations to the new Prime Minister of Saudi Arabia. Another mandate for Mr. Bin Salman. His Excellency, so congratulations. But to your point though, these federations are tiny. That's the other thing it shows. It's not like they're desperate for Russian money. They're desperate for any money, and Russian played the game. They knew this, the sponsorship and the hosting tournaments, all of this for, look, in the Olympics, 27 sports? I don't think anyone watches more than 4 of them at any other time when the Olympics aren't on. So it's the Russians picked all these off one by one, and you create a very influential power base in sport. And the thing with those officials that you mentioned there, the reason they're still there is because sports rule books weren't designed for a country invading another one. The only reason Russia is not in the Euro qualifiers or in the World Cup is a force majeure situation, which is this invasion. But having a guy sat next to you at the Exco, they can't kick him out, he'll win at CAS.
And of course, since we were last here at Leaders as well, Live Golf, which is completely ripped golf apart, but also made golf pretty interesting. We've been just talking and writing
we've written
golf
about it
more than any other time probably. Not for the right reasons as they would see it, but a really divisive moment that golf has still got to navigate its way through in the coming months.
It's an interesting one because actually there's been a lot of coverage of Live Golf, but only of the controversy. There's not actually been much coverage.
Barely think of a moment.
Well, they haven't got a TV contract, so you can't...
That's right, and then I noticed that they're now offering to fly reporters out and accommodate them just to cover the event.
Where will that be?
I'm not sure because I hadn't received the offer, but I know people
Which isn't
have.
unusual for sports. That a lot of sports do that, but obviously this sort of is heightened given the fact there's a struggle actually for it to be covered
looking
even
forward
as a
to
sport.
hosting the pod in Jeddah in a couple of months' time, guys.
Well,
I don't think we'll be there somehow, Tariq.
any closing thoughts? Any matters of the week? Anything you're working on?
No, I just mentioned the NFT thing because we have talked about cryptocurrency quite a lot.
The voice of scepticism around NFTs.
And we have been quite sceptical. So I think when the sort of news emerged about 6 months ago that the Premier League was looking to for an NFT partner, so I'm sure everybody knows, but these non-fungible tokens, these digital collectibles, where you can basically pay a lot of money and then in cryptocurrency, and then you get your name registered as the owner of one of these digital cards on some sort of blockchain somewhere. And I think the clubs thought, this is going to be an easy payday. Talking about £400 million over 3 years, and I think there was even consensus was that the partner had been selected. And then since then, basically the market has collapsed.
Unlike the pound.
I was going to say the other story with this is the pound collapsing. I mean, just looking at Chelsea on the 30th of May when Todd Bowley and Clear Lake bought Chelsea, it was
for £2.5 billion.
£2.5 billion pounds, not 4.75 or whatever the number is.
Which does get
$2.5 billion.
too often.
But that was about $3.15 billion. In dollar terms, that asset has been slashed by $400 million. I mean, I know he likes spending a lot of money in the transfer window, but that is a significant war chest that has just been wiped out thanks to, I guess, the new Chancellor and his policy there this week.
Yeah, so I guess for these American investors, those who've bought have seen certainly the paper value of their investment has dropped considerably, but I guess for those who are considering buying now, it's cheaper, isn't it?
Should be bargains. Also for the Premier League as well. I'm not going to ask people who work there, but the way the TV deals are structured, a lot of the overseas deals are in dollars, so there is some mitigation in terms of revenue for those clubs, isn't there? Once you convert whatever's in Malaysia and Singapore.
Like the US TV deals is whatever.
Plus a lot of Asian deals are in
dollars.
yeah.
But however, it's not quite as straightforward as that, because although $2.7 billion at the time in November is now something like whatever it is, $3.5 billion. It's there are clauses protect both companies with hedging with currency changes, so that they don't. It doesn't. They don't end up out of pocket, one or other party.
You've done that with your travel money for next summer.
And we should end with some positive news. Of course, you've written very positive about Premier League players today. How they benefit from the removal of the 45% tax bracket.
Yeah, I thought just to put it through the Times calculator, and they've got the average Premier League player is on $4 million a year, and that means that their net income rises by £242,000, which is pretty good. I mean, I know a lot of them sort of maybe have non-dom status and for their image rights, but in terms of their basic salary, that's pretty significant.
They budget they benefit from. Well, been great to do this again at Leaders. Great to be alongside Tariq and Martyn here with the audience, with so much going on in the world of sports news. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and as always, subscribing through the year, navigating the world of sports news with us. As ever, you can find us at Sport Unlocked on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. For now, thank you for listening, and particularly those here at Twickenham.
Thanks, guys.